You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 47, El Paso Stage. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Ashley Thomas.
And I'm Earl Green. Each week on Gene-ology, we give Gene Roddenberry's early TV writing a fresh look, keeping an eye out for the kind of morals, meanings, and messages that later found their way into Gene's most famous TV creation, Star Trek.
This week, we jump forward in time with Paladin for a ride on the El Paso Stage. Earl will be back with trivia in a moment, but first, here is how you can reach us. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Please drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook at missionlogpod. While you're at it, leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars please, or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. And now, this week's trivia. Take it away, Earl.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And fast forward, this is the 30th episode of the 4th season of Have Gun Will Travel, which aired on April 15th, 1961. Gene had taken the entirety of 1960 off from writing for Paladin, but he was still quite busy during that time, particularly in the area of developing his own material. Also, the early part of 1960 had been eventful in Hollywood, with a combined strike of both the Writers' and Actors' Guilds, the last time both unions would walk the picket lines together until 2023. 1960 had also seen the first series created by Gene hit the air for all of 6 weeks, namely the shot-on-video Western series Wrangler, which Gene produced and wrote roughly half of. And we'll get there fairly soon. But first, let's meet the cast of the El Paso Stage. The big name here is Buddy Ebsen as Paladin's nemesis, Marshal Elmo Crane. This was a little over a year before Buddy landed his career-making role as Jed Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies. He would play the head of the Clampett clan for 9 seasons before taking on the role of Barnaby Jones for 8 seasons. Later in 1961, Buddy would also co-star in Breakfast at Tiffany's, so needless to say, this guest shot on Have Gun Will Travel was right on the edge of Buddy Ebsen being the guest star or the star in his own right. As Sam DeWit, we have actor Carl Swenson, again no stranger to Have Gun Will Travel, this being the 5th of his 6 guest appearances, always in a different role. With a wealth of TV credits to his name, Carl still managed to get a lot of high-profile film work as well, in Judgment at Nuremberg, The Birds, and even in animation, such as Disney's The Sword in the Stone, where Carl was the voice of Merlin. He was a frequent recurring guest on Little House on the Prairie, where he played the character of Lars Hansen until his unexpected death in 1978. The real outlier here is Jeremy Slate, who played Frank DeWitt. This is Jeremy's only appearance on Have Gun Will Travel. He was a frequent flyer on such shows as Men into Space, One Step Beyond, and The Aquanauts. He would co-star in John Wayne's True Grit in 1969, but before that he would make an appearance in a 1963 episode of Gene's series The Lieutenant. This was the first of 2 Have Gun guest shots for Mary Monday, who played Lena. Her other guest roles include science fiction theater, The Loretta Young Show, The Twilight Zone, and The Rockford Files. She landed some movie roles as well, most notably The Ballad of Cable Hogue and First Monday in October. Finally, though he doesn't have too many lines, the part of the town judge was played by Hank Patterson, who was most famous for his 84 appearances on Green Acres as Frank Ziffel, a role he also played in a 1969 crossover episode between Green Acres and the Beverly Hillbillies. It all comes back to the Clampetts this week. And here we have the one and only episode of Have Gun Will Travel, directed by one Robert Butler, a veteran TV director who later gained a reputation as the guy you want to direct your pilot episode. Robert would work with Gene many more times, and not just on the 2 episodes he directed of The Lieutenant, because in late 1964, Robert Butler directed The Cage, Star Trek's first pilot episode. Even into the 70s, he would keep working in worlds created by Gene Roddenberry as director of the third and final attempt to pilot Gene's PAX concept, the 1975 made-for-TV movie Strange New World, singular, not plural. He must have also impressed Richard Boone because he directed an episode of Boone's post-Have Gun Playhouse series, The Richard Boone Show, in 1963. Robert Butler would direct the first episodes of such legendary shows as Adam West's Batman series, Hill Street Blues, Remington Steele, which he also had a hand in creating, Moonlighting, and Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Into the early part of the 21st century, Robert Butler was indeed the guy everyone wanted to direct their pilot episodes, and we lost him in 2023. And at that point, he was the last living person to have worked on The Cage. By the way, you can hear our own Larry Nemechek talk to Mr. Butler in the September 3rd, 2019 edition of the Trek Files podcast. Act 1. Paladin's on the stagecoach to Brackettville, Texas, with a couple of talkative fellow passengers, a young lawyer named Frank, and Lena, who's traveling to Brackettville to take a job as a saloon girl. Paladin's attempts to snooze during the long drive are interrupted by legal advice, questions about his business in Brackettville, which he initially answers by showing his business card, da-da-da-da, and some local gossip. Frank disapproves of the newly hired marshal of Brackettville, a man with a record as a killer. He plans to use the law to oust the man, and Paladin chuckles at that idea. In the law of survival, he warns, there are no appeals. Moments after arriving in Brackettville, Paladin is approached by a man who leads him to the local watering hole. You can find everything in one spot. Booze, gambling, you name it. The man identifies himself as Sam DeWit. Paladin observes him using hidden foot switches to affect the outcome of the wheel, which means that whatever number somebody just bet on, it was not left up to chance. Sam leads Paladin back to his office, where the blinds are drawn and a man with a badge sits, Bracketville's new marshal, Elmo Crane. Paladin's heard of him, but he doesn't say any more than that. Now it's down to business. Paladin sent his card in response to a newspaper article mentioning that DeWitt's son was involved in reckless and dangerous activities, and DeWitt hired him to deal with the problem, though Paladin says that there was nothing in the paper about DeWitt's son having committed any actual crimes. Marshal Elmo Crane drawls, depending on what you mean by crimes. And then Crane and DeWitt spin an unconvincing story of what has happened, and Paladin's not buying it. Furthermore, Crane says that Paladin's job is to kidnap DeWitt's son and take him to Laredo, where Crane's friends will sit on him for a bit. Sorry guys, not sounding any less sketchy. DeWitt hands him $1,000 to do the job, no questions asked, but Paladin instead counts out $500 for the time and trouble he took to travel to Brackettville, leaves DeWitt with the other $500, and turns to leave. Before he reaches the door, Crane takes the piece of wood he's been whittling and hurls it at Paladin's head, giving him a nasty knock. Then he jumps up and punches Paladin, who is staggered and bloodied by the blow. Crane urges Paladin to draw his gun and make a fight of it, but DeWitt's had enough. $500 to send Paladin away is cheaper than burying him, and if Paladin gets on the 4 o'clock stage out of Brackettville, nothing more will be said. Still dazed, Paladin staggers back out into the saloon. Crane threatens DeWitt for interfering. It's easy to make someone the marshal, but it's not as easy to unmake him. Act 2. In the saloon, Paladin slowly makes his way to the bar, drawing attention because he's obviously just lost a fight. Lena and Frank spot him. Paladin drowns a shot of whiskey and decides to cause more trouble. He goes to the wheel, places a bet, creates a distraction, and stands in a spot where the croupier has to stand on Paladin's foot to try to reach the hidden switch. But since the switch can't be stepped on to slow the wheel, Paladin has a winning bet and relieves the house of $1,000. Lena, who worked out what just happened, warns Paladin he better get out of here, and he hands her a large tip. That's about the time Sam DeWitt and Marshal Crane show up and demand the $1,000 back for tampering with the wheel. Paladin briefly considers making a fight of it, but thinks better of it, leaving the bar. DeWit catches Frank staring at him from the bar, and they stare each other down briefly until Frank leaves. Frank finds Paladin outside nursing his wounds, and admires his show of moral courage. That's when Paladin learns the truth. Frank is Sam's son, the son Sam once kidnapped. His reckless and dangerous activities involve throwing the law at his father and at the new marshal. Frank tells Paladin he'd like him to meet someone, the county judge. At the judge's office, Paladin receives a little bit of Old West first aid, while Frank says he's got proof that Elmo Crane has committed 5 unjustifiable homicides, proof that can relieve Crane of his marshal's star. He and the judge are about to serve these legal papers on Crane, and who does Frank have in mind to replace Crane? He offers the job to Paladin. Paladin's mulling this over after the two men leave the judge's office when his shot rings out. Paladin runs out into the street to find a crowd staring at a man lying face down. Frank DeWit is dead. Elmo Crane stands over him, the legal summons that was just handed to him burning to ash in his hand. He claims Frank tried to pull a gun on him. The judge, fearing for his life, declines to counter Crane's story. Sam DeWit steps into the crowd and sees his son's body, staring at Crane when he realizes what's happened. Crane makes sure Paladin gets on the 4 o'clock coach. Elmo Crane is in charge of Bracketville now. Act 3. That night in his office, Sam DeWit grieves when the door opens and Paladin walks in, having gotten off the coach at the city limits and walked back. The two men strike a deal. Paladin will deal with Crane, and at that point, DeWit owes him basically everything he has left. Sam DeWit gets the money out of his safe, but as he walks toward Paladin with it, there's a gunshot from outside the window of DeWit's office. Elmo Crane strikes again. After killing DeWit and climbing through the window, he starts firing at Paladin, saying that he'll frame Paladin for killing and robbing DeWit. After all, the safe is open. Paladin lures Crane out into the closed-down saloon, gives him a savage beating, and then goes into hiding, creating distractions that cause Crane to use up his ammo. Paladin jumps through the window and saddles up his horse as Crane reloads, taunting the marshal the whole time. Crane runs into the street, gun drawn, but Paladin has picked a hiding place from which he can continue to create distractions, finally escaping from Bracketville on horseback. Crane follows Paladin on his own horse for at least a day into the high desert and well outside of his jurisdiction. That's when Paladin stops to face off with him. Paladin tries to talk Crane down from a fight, and Crane appears to agree to walk away, but it's a ruse so he can catch Paladin unaware. But considering how trustworthy Elmo Crane has been so far, Paladin is fully aware and he's ready for him. 2 shots take Elmo Crane down. He is no longer the Marshal of Bracketville, but the price paid to relieve him of his badge has been far too high. The end.
Earl, my goodness, these observations.
There are many of them.
I have a few myself, my friend.
Well, I'm going to lead off with this one. You know, there is an old saw about how you can sing almost anything written by Emily Dickinson to the tune of the Yellow Rose of Texas because a great deal of her writing was in common meter. That's not specific enough for me in this case, though, because I think you can sing the broad strokes plot of this episode by Gene Roddenberry to the tune of Marty Robbins' El Paso. So, allow me to demonstrate, and probably not very well. Down near the West Texas town of El Paso, Paladin got beat up and shot at again. And I'm going to leave it there to avoid even
That's perfect.
The tiniest chance of a copyright strike. Not like my singing is in key enough for that to really be a risk, but hey, find us in the comments. Better yet, go to patreon.com/missionlog. Join the Mission Log Patreon, and that gets you into the Discord where there is a Gene-ology channel. Join us and show us the rest of your lyrics for the El Paso stage version of Marty Robbins' El Paso. And my sincere apologies to the ghost of Marty Robbins.
That was lovely. And like I heard, you know, when I read the title, I was like, wait a minute. Do I know that song? As soon as you started saying, oh, yes, that one. I fell in love with a Mexican girl. Yeah, hadn't heard that one in a hot minute.
Yeah, maybe not exactly in circulation, but hey, grew up with, my dad listened to almost exclusively country radio. And we were in a town where, you were lucky if you had two rock stations. If you had two rock stations in the town I grew up in, it was a good year for that town because, it was kind of like, well, what's the quote? We have two kinds of radio in this town, country and western.
Yep.
Is it just me, or is Paladin's business card now about the size of a 3x5 index card?
I think it grows with every episode that we watch.
Every season.
Yeah, every season. It has a growth spurt between seasons.
It's like the rest of the cast. It negotiates a better deal for itself between seasons. Okay, I know you want the camera to pick it up, but it suddenly seems comically large. Now, they show an insert shot of, a well-manicured hand holding the card up. Okay, that's business card sized. And I think they've been using that same insert shot since the first season. But then when we cut back to Frank and Lena holding the card, it's about the size of this oversized one here. And so suddenly the difference just stands out even more. That thing is huge.
It is indeed.
I found out that Brackettville is a real place. I was curious enough to look this up, and it was indeed a supply stop on the road that ran between San Antonio and El Paso. So it was really kind of the golden years of Brackettville were in the Reconstruction period, but it has shrunk consistently since the end of World War II, which was really the last gasp of Brackettville being a major stop, because there was an adjacent army fort. And so, up to and during World War II, the fort was active. That kind of fueled the economy of Brackettville. Now, not so much.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting way to introduce the episode. I mean, obviously, El Paso Stage. Obviously, we're talking about taking a trip. But it was interesting to see Paladin because normally you see him on horseback, but yeah, I guess the man's got to take a stage every now and again to get where he wants to go.
They had his horse tied to the back of the coach.
Ah, okay.
Because, remember, the moment the coach comes to a stop in Brackettville, he goes and unties his horse and ties it to the wooden bar that is provided for that purpose.
That's right. You're right.
And he initially gets chased out of town without his horse. So I think that's the big reason he didn't come back to settle scores with Elmo Crane. He's like, you guys still have my horse.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you're not going to leave your car somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Speaking of Elmo Crane, okay, if your potential employers are drawing the shades as you enter the room, is it a little too obvious that maybe something shady is about to happen here?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand wanting to draw the shades for privacy or whatever while you're having a private conversation, but when the office is in the back of a casino, your saloon is a casino type place, and you're going into the back office and you're shutting the door, shutting the blinds. Yeah.
I don't know. I would feel like that would be enough of an indicator that maybe you're about to get Dobied again.
Again.
But this isn't Dobie's episode. Dobie's in the next episode.
He is?
Yes, he is. Another thing that seems to have been amped up along with the size of the business card is the amount of blood we're seeing. Did you take note of that?
It was considerably more violent than we've seen a lot of other episodes. This is a darker episode.
Yeah, I mean, Paladin gets really beat up, and I have to hand it to Richard Boone. Through much of Act 2, he is really selling that he is taken more of a beating than he can just walk off. Like, maybe we're acknowledging that piece of wood that Crane threw at his, he didn't just toss it at his head. I mean, he chucked it.
Yeah.
And that piece of wood was about, not the length, but about the diameter of a baseball bat. So I'm going to guess from the acting cues that Boone is giving off, we're dealing with a mild concussion here.
Yeah, he definitely looks like he got walloped. He's not doing real great. He's a little disoriented, slurred speech, talking like he's drunk, but he's not.
Oh, not yet.
Not yet. He asked for some not watered whiskey, please and thank you. But yeah, I'm impressed even in that concussed state that he's all like, nah, we're gonna spin the wheel because I'm gonna get my money one way or another.
Yeah, I don't. I have made that connection too. It's like, okay, he is not going to write down this trip as a loss. He's not accepting that. When Paladin gives Lena her tip and thanks her for being mindful of his safety, he boops her on the nose. Oh, this
is the second time he's done a boop.
That was quite a blow to the head. He thinks Lena's a cat.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
So, Brackettville, small town, I guess the judge is also the doctor?
Or at least somewhat knowledgeable in such things?
Yeah.
Or knows basic first aid?
And again, kind of going back to Richard Boone's acting choices here, I appreciate that he was showing us that Old West first aid. You know, hey, I'm just going to pour a little shot of whiskey into this towel and pat these open wounds on your face down with it. That doesn't feel great.
No, it doesn't, but, you know, it will sanitize it.
Yeah, the hard way.
Yeah.
I appreciate these acting choices on Boone's part because that pendulum swings really hard in the other direction toward the 1980s.
Yeah.
Which is where you get action heroes who are impervious to anything, you know. Bullets, shrapnel from explosions, you know, should be pelting them. Nah. You know, small area tactical nukes, nah, you can walk that off in the 80s. Your heroes have no vulnerability and even less body fat. Here it feels like... Are we being shown indicators that Paladin is past his sell-by date?
You know, he's about to go all Murtaugh.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. I had that line from Lethal Weapon in my notes as well.
Yeah.
So that was exactly what I thought of as, he's getting a little too old for this, which is kind of interesting for the show to acknowledge that. It's not a serialized show.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to design it deliberately so that there is a syndication aftermarket that allows for showing things in any order. It's a really interesting choice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good call there, good catch. I like that we have some interesting setup here from the stage on for the kind of, you know, this is maybe more of a discussion versus observation, but the theme that we're discussing is this violates my morals for this job I'm being hired to do, but it's still technically legal. I thought that was interesting because we got that discussion on the stage. Well, this is the kind of conundrum Paladin is faced with when he goes in to talk with DeWit and Marshal Elmo, and he's like, yeah, I think, nah, this ain't gonna jive with me. I will take my fee, though, and get out of here. And, you know, of course he gets walloped for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's basically everything that is going to happen in the episode is discussed in, like, the first 5 minutes in that stage.
Yeah, that we're going to be discussing the difference between, yes, this is what the law books say, but if somebody feels sufficiently threatened, they just don't care about that.
Yep.
Yeah, like you said, I think we'll have more to say about that later. In that final fight with Crane, again, more visible damage from a fist fight than 50s TV was showing us. I mean, by a lot. And I thought about that, and I finally landed on this. You know what? Good. Because if you're going to do violence on screen, show that it hurts.
Yeah.
I still don't think it then or now that anyone really realistically shows... If you punch somebody, that hurts your hand. Mm-hmm. It hurts pretty bad, actually, if it's not something you're trained to endure. And there's a reason boxers wear gloves.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, you know, it's not as sanitized. The violence is not as sanitized. You know, once you sanitize violence so much that it just looks like, oh, this is not doing any more damage than just pushing someone around, you're not doing anyone any favors in terms of dealing with reality. I know in Charlie Red Dog, I was kind of criticizing popular culture for, forever fetishizing the gun. But if you're going to bring it down to mano a mano, show that stuff hurts. They're not 100% of the way there, but they're a lot closer than they have been in episodes past. And wow, new decade, new set of rules. I didn't think it would be that obvious, but there we are. Okay, Ashley, there's a lot happening on the El Paso stage. I mean, the world's a stage, but this stage in particular, even though it's only the size of a stagecoach, it's kind of funny that the episode is named that, but it's really just the opening scene.
Right.
But as you said, everyone kind of lays out the stakes in that opening scene.
Yeah.
So tell me what you found there.
Well, this idea of being hired for a job, but then the thing you're asked to do on the job is technically legal, but it violates your personal moral code.
I can relate to that very personally.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing. I like that Paladin cites a case. It kind of gives you some more insight. It's like, oh yeah, I mean, we know that Paladin is well read, but that also extends to legal cases, legal documents. So that's pretty interesting to me. But I've got this quote, and I really like what he says when the young Mr. DeWit says, "Oh, you don't seem to have high regard for the law based on your line of work." Paladin says, "On the contrary, I have the highest regard for the statutes, including some you won't find in that book there. One of them, survival. When you lose on that count, friend, there's no appeal." And, unfortunately, the young Mr. DeWit learns that one the hard way.
Yeah, it's the last thing he learns.
Yeah. It's tough. This was a hard watch. You get a real sense of futility watching it.
Yeah, futility and kind of something we were talking about off mic was that, and I probably should have looked this up before we started in on the show, it seems like the standards of American television have changed where violence is concerned. Blood is shown. Shots are fired. A lot of shots fired in this episode compared to Have Gun Will Travel episodes we have viewed in the past. And there's a body count. There is a tally at the end of this one. There is a butcher bill that seems fairly high, again, compared to what Have Gun Will Travel has shown us in previous installments. So it feels like something has changed. I kind of want to look into that some more and kind of see what changed. This is the sort of thing that back in the day the Federal Communications Commission would weigh on. What is acceptable in broadcast TV, what isn't. And it definitely seems like there has been a shift, and this episode is taking full advantage of that. I'm glad you found that kind of lingering question about legally allowable but morally questionable. That may not have registered with me as being the message, but now that you mention that, I think that probably is the message. Like you said, this was a hard watch, and I kind of had a hard time drawing anything out of it. Where my attention got fixated, what I kind of hyper-focused on, was the DeWit family dynamic. Because, as the status says on Facebook, it's complicated.
Indeed.
It's a turning point in the story when Sam DeWit finds out that his own marshal has gunned down his son Frank in cold blood. And so the fact that Sam is actually grieving this loss, it seems like the relationship was not broken completely beyond repair. And this kind of takes me back to Roy Carter and his dad. Where we really didn't get a decent sample size of the relationship before things went south, before Roy wound up in jail. So we don't really know what's going on. We don't know how much love lost is there. Did Frank try to talk to his dad before taking the more extreme approach of drawing up legal action against him for hiring, a man with a rap sheet as the local lawman? Did Frank not correctly gauge how much of a threat Crane was? I mean, surely he's got, if he's got evidence on him, he should damn well know how dangerous Crane is. So, it seemed like there was a lot of missing information here, but as no stranger to, shall we say, difficult and broken father-son dynamics, I really homed in on that as kind of being the main course, and, I'm going to admit now that may not be the main course. It's just, it's the kind of side dish that's designed to trip me up specifically. Yeah. And so I homed in on that. But there's a lot of missing information about the DeWitts here. We don't get enough of a sample of what the relationship would have been ideally. We just know things are difficult now.
One conclusion that I drew, and this was like a show, don't tell thing, was Mr. DeWitt runs the saloon casino establishment. And obviously there's a lot of shenanigans going on there where the wheel is rigged. There are, they water the whiskey. So it stretches farther, but people are still paying full price for watered down whiskey. I kept thinking about, this is a man that uses dishonest measures and cheats people, admittedly, it's a gambling establishment. You're not guaranteed to win anything. If you're stacking the odds in your favor and not giving people a fair shake, then it's not an honestly run establishment. And they're like, my son, he's the rebellious, whatever. And, they're not making up they're not being honest about who he is. Oh, he's a lawyer, he's a troublemaker. And I was like, yeah, it's because you guys are the ones breaking the law, and he's trying to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
So,
and they can't even keep when they're trying to fabricate an accusation out of whole cloth, to try to get Paladin to take the job, and they can't even keep their story straight.
No. I think the line that Frank says, justice discards party, friendship, and kindred. Can love your family, but if they act unjustly, they need to be held accountable for that. Justice demands an answer.
Yeah, and it gets a lot of really unfortunate answers in this episode.
Yeah.
Okay, Ashley, we have survived our ride on the El Paso stage. Everyone survives the ride on the stage. It's the rest of the episode that they don't survive.
Yeah, and they've not sent us packing yet, so...
Yeah, so there may be some messages, some meanings here. What have you found? Because I feel like it's not like we approach the discussion, the heavy discussion part of the show as any kind of a competition, like, my talking points are best. But I really feel like you were the winner of that segment because you found something that had kind of slid by me.
Well, I think, it's an important point of nuance to open the episode with a legal case where person was hired for a job, not realizing that the job was going to require him to do something that, while legal, still violated his personal morals. I think that's a really interesting discussion because not all things that are legal are necessarily moral from certain points of view. I think for me, I hadn't really thought a whole lot about that. And, this is how my nerd brain works until I started playing the Firefly tabletop game. Have you had an opportunity to play that?
I have not played the game, but I am very well acquainted with the series.
Yeah.
I've heard many good things about the game. I hear it's shiny.
It is, in fact, shiny. So whenever you and I get to hang out in person, I'll make sure I bring it because it's a great game.
I will bring my pretty floral bonnet.
I would expect nothing less. But the game has job cards that you can do, and one of the designations on the job cards is the job legal, is the job illegal, and then some of the cards will also specify that the job is either legal and immoral or illegal and immoral. And if you have moral crew members, they can be disgruntled by that. And that's like, if they get 2 disgruntled tokens, they leave your ship and you lose that crew member. So I was like, legal and immoral? And it occurred to me, it's like, oh, yeah, lots of things have been legal that were not necessarily moral. You know, slavery. I'm like, okay. It's something that, you know, again, for whatever reason, that had never occurred in my little nerd brain before. So I'm watching this, and you have a very corrupt man in a position of power. He even says to the elder Mr. DeWit, it's much easier to make a marshal than it is to unmake one. And basically, it told him, it's like, you're not in charge here, buddy. Because, yeah, if you're calling the lawyer the troublemaker, getting into some good trouble, if you will, as Senator John Lewis would have said. Paladin even tells the elder Mr. DeWit later in the episode, he wears a badge. He ordered me to leave town. The courts would just assume I was trying to resist arrest. He might outdraw me. The risk alone is worth $5,000. In your own words, DeWit, take it or leave it. And basically, like, Paladin's like, dude, if you want me to clean up your mess, which you shouldn't have created in the first place by putting a man like that in a position of power, yeah, it's going to cost you, and it's already cost you your son. To quote the great philosopher Sarek, what did it cost? What did it cost?
Yeah, after a loss like that, all the money in the safe, that's it. Yeah. It's meaningless. And you kind of read that from Carl Swenson's performance as DeWit.
Yeah.
This is a man who has lost it all. I felt like maybe we had a side dish here of pick your battles. And maybe exercise some common sense, because troublemaker or not, Frank DeWit was reckless.
Yeah. No, he was. He was the naivete of youth. He's a young man and hadn't seen enough of the world to understand that, yeah, you might have the law on your side, but he hasn't understood that nuance that Paladin was talking about. There's another law, it's called survival. If you lose out on that, there is no appeal.
Yeah. And it seems like if Frank had already gathered enough evidence to pen, 5 murders on Elmo Crane, he should know that this guy is not going to be too worried about him showing up with the legal summons, accompanied by the judge. The judge he's a pitiable character. He wants to do the right thing, but there's also a fresh body on the ground telling him, he better shut up.
Yeah.
And so you can criticize that nameless judge character on moral cowardice, or you can just kind of say, okay, I get where you're coming from, saving your own skin to fight another day.
Yeah, I interpreted that differently. I was mad as hell when that happened. I was like, dude betrayed him. And that's perhaps, because it happened off camera, perhaps not necessarily true.
I don't think the judge necessarily sold him out or, just walked him to the slaughter, more or less. But it seems like he also should have known what was going to happen. But while we're talking about naivete, let's talk about DeWitt Sr. Sam did not want a lawman. He wanted his own personal enforcer. Sam DeWitt thought he could bring a shark into town and keep him on a leash. Doesn't work that way. It just means that you are now separated from a freaking shark, with or without laser beams on his head, by only the length of that leash.
Yeah.
It's thematically kind of interesting to watch this right after Charlie Red Dog.
Yes.
Because there's about 1 1/3 years between the two, and yet it's like this is the dark side of Charlie Red Dog. In Charlie Red Dog, you had Charlie wandering into a town that was used to pinning a badge onto any passing gunman. In El Paso Stage, we see what happens when any passing gunman gets that badge. So what matters more, pinning the badge on the man or understanding more about the man to whom the badge is being pinned? Because if you get that equation wrong, as you see in this episode, you get one hell of a body count.
Yeah, and I think it is clever how Paladin was able to skirt that. It's like, you followed me into Mexico, dude. You're out of your jurisdiction. And so from there, it just became a duel. And
Elmo, goodbye.
I almost said Elmo was itching for a fight, but maybe he was tickling for a fight. But this was no tickle fight, my friend.
Oh no, this one was gloves off. There are things about this episode that don't feel very Gene. Mm-hmm. But that's okay. It's very well plotted. Mm-hmm. And despite the fact that it perhaps lacks hope for the future, I do think Gene has some things to tell the audience here. This is one of those cases where it's very on the nose. Mm-hmm. And that is enhanced by the increased level of violence that is apparently now permissible, after a year away from Have Gun Will Travel. Mm-hmm. And that combined with Paladin being, extremely fallible in this one, feels like this show is evolving in its new decade.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think for me, the biggest thing that sticks here is it's a cautionary tale about who do you give power to? Are you giving power, like political or otherwise? Are you giving power to somebody who will wield that power with benevolence? Or are you giving power to someone who will use it as a bludgeoning tool?
Yeah. That's a very, very 2024 relevant question.
Uh-huh. Sadly.
And we're getting it in 1961. Again, sometimes you feel like nothing's changed.
This is the second episode where we're like, wow, this is sadly still prescient. Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you would like to support us directly, you may do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, please drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com.
On the next Gene-ology, Alice. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takachi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.